Personal log comparing the Atlas of Reality BT-1884-MW to the AT-AT of Reality SW-1977-LF. Powerhouses of their own realities, these machines dominate whatever battlefield they enter. One, a machine of terror of the Galactic Empire, the other, the ultimate BattleMech ever conceived of by the Starly. So, which one would win in a straight-up fight? Now, the main problem with trying to compare these two is that it's difficult to find exact figures like how thick the AT-AT's armor is, how do the weapons of the two realities compare, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to do my best. Fortunately, there are a few similar technologies in the two realities. Now, for the purposes of knowing exactly which models of AT-AT and Atlas I'm talking about, I will be comparing the AS-7-D Atlas to the Galactic Civil War era AT-AT. None of that first order nonsense. Starting with weaponry, the most obvious thing to talk about in a matchup like this. The AS-7D Atlas has an AC-20, an LRM-20, an SRM-6, and 4 medium lasers. Now, saying this only gives us a sense of the general damage these weapons can do to other objects in their universe, so let me get into a little bit more detail. The Atlas's AC-20 is a Defiance Mech Hunter model, and while I have no further specifics on how big it is overall, AC-20s have been known to range from 120 to 203 millimeters, or 5 to 8 inches in freedom units. Or if you have a specific interest in World War II naval ships, like me, it ranges from the size of a main cannon on a US naval destroyer to the size of a main cannon on a US heavy cruiser. Not exactly battleship size, but still devastating and something that could easily maul most land vehicles. The LRM-20, on the other hand, is a far-fire maxi-rag launcher that launches salvos of 20 long-range missiles. And while I couldn't get the exact statistics, LRMs have a warhead and chassis constructed of a metal composite that is mixed with high explosives to allow the whole damn thing to explode, doing the same sort of damage of missiles that were previously 4 times the size. So while it may look small, they will absolutely ruin your day as salvo after salvo of quick-firing missile is launched at you. The SRM-6 is in a similar vein to the LRMs, but are generally larger and more point-and-shoot in a straight line. And the Atlas's Sarhas Maxi SRM-6 launcher is a very reliable model using many BattleMechs. The one thing I do have some doubts about is the 4 Defiance B3M medium lasers, but not because they aren't lethal. I am just unsure if they would do any real damage to the AT-AT, but that's for later when I get into defenses. The lasers essentially operate by vaporizing part of whatever they come into contact with, and given enough time, could burn a hole straight through anything. Medium lasers are pretty standard weapons and comparable to AC-5s in terms of the damage they can do, which essentially range from an 80mm gun to 120mm. That essentially ranges from a 3-inch gun to a 5-inch gun. The AT-AT, on the other hand, carries twin-link Bass MS-1 heavy laser cannons mounted on the chin and 2 temple-mounted medium blasters, either of the Papyri Cerulean R90 line or the Time and Back FF4 line. And unlike the lasers on the Atlas, the AT-AT's laser cannons and blasters actually fire a beam of particles that was converted from an energy-rich gas and release it as a plasma bolt at the target, which can range from a piercing bolt of energy to just creating an explosion on impact, which is quite similar to how plasma weaponry work in the Atlas's own reality. Although, rather than using high-energy gas, plasma rifles superheat plastic foam into plasma and fires it out of an electromagnetic accelerator. And in a similar vein to how blasters can explode on impact, plasma rifles can do scatter damage on impact, which is less of an explosion and more just a superheated plasma scattering and doing damage to whatever it hits in the surrounding area. Now, do I think that this is a one-to-one comparison? No, not at all. In fact, I think the heavy laser cannons on the AT-AT are actually more powerful than the plasma rifles on average, but scaling them up shouldn't be too hard, as plasma rifles have a similar ability to do damage as particle projector cannons, or PPCs, and there are heavy PPCs in existence, so this should make for a decent reference when attempting to upscale a plasma rifle's damage. As for the medium blasters, that's where I'm a little unsure. They are powerful, yes, but they're not described as laser cannons. Do I think they can do anti-vehicle work? Yes. Anti-infantry? Absolutely. I just don't have specifics. But I do believe that they are comparable to the small lasers found in the Atlas's reality. Small lasers are not only capable of anti-vehicle work, but are also used in an anti-infantry role and have a pretty good firing rate when compared to medium and large lasers, making for a great secondary weapon on most BattleMechs and vehicles that equip them. So I do think that this is a fair equivalent weapon, and if I'm wrong, let me know. So, for the sake of the upcoming thought experiment, the AT-AT's weapons will have similar stats to 2 small lasers and 2 heavy PPCs. Now that we have the weapons out of the way, let's talk about armor, which is going to be a lot more complicated, as while I do have a very good idea of what the Atlas has, how it's laid out, and All that, I got next to nothing on the AT-AT's armor beyond the fact that it's Durasteel. Now, Durasteel is a pretty resilient material and is used in everything from armor to weapons and construction. Against blaster and laser cannons, the AT-AT's armor is actually quite resilient, with only a couple of weak spots in the neck and underbelly. Although it's more than possible to take out a leg with sustained fire from weaker weapons, although that method still takes time. As for what sort of punishment the AT-AT's armor could take, it's actually quite a bit. It's strong enough to shrug off man-launched anti-vehicle rockets that make direct strikes on the head, but it's also capable of dissipating energy attacks of anything short of heavy laser cannons. This is actually why the medium lasers on the Atlas would probably do jack shit against an AT-AT. And it's actually similar to how laser reflective armor would operate. Laser reflective armor is an alternative armor for BattleMechs, and it dissipates nearly every type of energy attack known to the inner sphere, ensuring that even the most devastating energy attack does negligible amounts of damage. But could the Durasteel armor withstand strikes from the L rounds and AC-20 rounds? Not as well as energy weapons, I think. See, the AT-AT was designed specifically to fend off attacks from weapons that are known to be widely used, such as blasters and laser cannons. And while missiles do exist and they are available, blasters and laser cannons are far more common and dangerous in general just because the technology is cheap to produce, use, and maintain. Especially when the ammo can last for as long as you have power and an energy-rich gas. And that could last you for hundreds, if not thousands of shots, negating the need for physical ammo in pretty much every other case. Meaning that the AT-AT wasn't really designed with the expectations that someone would fire a snub-nosed naval cannon at it. And the rapid-fire nature of the Atlas's missiles would probably give hell to the AT-AT. And there is two weapons that the AT-AT would definitely struggle to fend off. The Atlas has two fists that it can and will use for punching. It just has no real defense for that. So yes, the Atlas has the ability to destroy an AT-AT. I'm just unsure with how long it'd take exactly. But how well could the Atlas stand up to the punishment of the AT-AT's weapons? Pretty well, actually. With its 19 tons of standard armor, most of it facing the front, it actually has a pretty strong defense against the AT-AT. Unless the Atlas gets unlucky and takes a shot to the head. Using the earlier stats I mentioned about how powerful I think the AT-AT's weapons are, it would require roughly 3 direct strikes from one of the laser cannons to start to do any real damage to the internals of the Atlas. If they hit directly in the center torso in the front, or if they hit the side torsos, roughly 2 shots. A similar thing for destroying one of the arms, and you would need roughly 4 shots to be able to start disabling a leg. So yes, I do think that the Atlas can withstand the bombardment an AT-AT can throw out, for a time anyway. There is one final thing I want to go over that before I describe how I believe a fight would go between these two foes, and that is speed and maneuverability. And, well, in a straight line, the AT-AT actually has the slight speed advantage, with a top speed of around 60 kilometers per hour, or 37 miles per hour in freedom units. The Atlas tops out at around 48 kilometers per hour, or 30 miles per hour in freedom units, meaning that the Atlas can't outrun the AT-AT if it needed to retreat, but the AT-AT could run away if it needed to. However, that's just in a straight line in ideal conditions. In a dense environment, such as the forests of Endor or an urban city with skyscrapers and all that, the AT-AT has a significant disadvantage in its turning speeds and radius. Where the Atlas can just stop and turn in place relatively quickly, the AT-AT actually has to circle a little bit, and very carefully as its high center of gravity actually works against it in this regard. So, while it is faster than the Atlas, it's not exactly as nimble as the bipedal war machine. Especially when the Atlas can turn its entire torso in such a way to maintain a full barrage of weapons fire on the AT-AT while running at an angle, where the AT-AT's weapons are limited to where the head is being pointed at, more or less. And that lack of maneuverability is where the AT-AT is going to get slaughtered. Okay, now I'm going to move on to how I think the fight would go, and I'm going to be honest, it depends on the terrain. In a dense environment like a city or the forest of Endor or Kashyyyk, the Atlas's superior maneuverability would allow it to get an edge on the AT-AT, letting it conduct flanking attacks, bringing it into choke points, or allowing it to get in close for melee fighting. The AT-AT would not be able to run away effectively in such an environment unless it was already positioned to do so. And while its weapons can't be discounted, it would have to get a really lucky headshot to stop an Atlas before the Atlas comes in and stops it. But what about more ideal terrain, like the wide open plain like that was seen at the Battle of Hoth, or the grasslands of Naboo? Well, there the AT-AT has a better chance, but it would have to rely on the Atlas being some distance away to strike at it safely. The more time it has to fire at the Atlas, the better its odds are. That said, it would have to compete with the Atlas's LRMs, and unlike the AT-AT, whose maneuverability is just limited, but not so much that it can keep its weapons facing the Atlas as it charged, the Atlas can zigzag across the battlefield, making itself a harder target as it can change direction and speed much easier than the AT-AT can, as it closes the distance to bring its SRM-6 and AC-20 in range for a more serious attack. But it's not impossible for the AT-AT to win. It could get lucky, it could get a headshot, or the Atlas could charge it in a straight line, just taking the hits directly, or it could just land enough shots. Like, it depends on if it can land enough shots to take it out completely, which can be difficult. But honestly, I'd only give it like a 3 in 10 chance of the AT-AT being able to successfully damage an Atlas before the Atlas can destroy the AT-AT. This is all my opinion, and it's partially based on the fact that the AT-AT was never designed to actually face a near-peer opponent. Instead, it was built as a weapon of intimidation and fear, absorbing attacks while having the firepower to wipe out any salvaged tank, cobbled together combat vehicle, or last stand fortification it came across, while also having the ability to carry up to 40 stormtroopers and being escorted by smaller AT-STs. The Atlas, on the other hand, well, to quote Alexander Kerensky himself, a mech as powerful as possible, as impenetrable as possible, and as ugly and foreboding as conceivable, so that fear itself will be our ally. That's how he wanted the Atlas, and that is not only how it is known, but acts. It was designed to ensure the Starlink had technological superiority over the Great Houses, and even centuries after it was introduced, it remains a threat to even newer designs of BattleMech that will hesitate to engage it directly. And where the AT-AT was designed to scare the hell out of and wipe out smaller rebel groups who are usually disorganized, the Atlas was designed to win wars. Thank you for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown, and let me know if you think I got it right, or if you think I got horribly wrong. Subscribe if you want, leave a like, all that stuff, and I hope to see you again.